As we know, Mental Health Matters for May is all about grief. What you may not know is that Pastor Amy loves children's books. So today I'm going to read a children's book about grief, but it's not just for children. The other thing that you may not know is that I love recipes and cooking. Well, okay, actually I love eating, but this is all about recipes and the ways that we can use a metaphor for our grief to learn lessons. Tear Soup, story by Pat Schwiebert and Chuck Declan. There once was an old woman that was somewhat wise, whom everyone called Grandy. She had just suffered a big loss in her life. Pops, her husband, suffered the same loss, but in his own way. This is the story of how Grandy faced her loss by setting out to make tear soup. For many years, the custom of making tear soup has been forgotten. As people's life became more rushed, they found it much easier to pull soup in a can from the shelf and heat it on the stove. But several years ago, Grandy got a taste of a well-seasoned tear soup. One of her friends made it from scratch after she lost a child. As soon as Grandy tasted the rich flavor of that carefully made soup, she promised herself never again to assume that quicker was better. Because of her great loss, Grandy knew this time her recipe for tear soup would call for a big pot. With a big pot, she would have plenty of room for all the memories, all the misgivings, and all the feelings of the tears she needed to stew in the pot over time. Sometimes she wept quietly. Sometimes when she was in a safe place where no one could hear her, she even wailed. Her grandson Chester, who just wanted her Grandy to feel better, hoped that his chocolate drops would make her feel better. Mrs. Blomklotz and Miss Chadwick and Mr. Long, all brave yet fearful neighbors, dropped by to see how Grandy was doing. They filled the air with words, but none of their words took the smell of the tear soup away. Grandy was gracious because she knew how helpless that her friends felt. They wanted to fix her, but they couldn't. All Grandy really needed from them at that moment was knowing look and a warm hug. "I'm here," Midge cried. "I got here as fast as I could, and I'll be wherever you need me. What a tragedy. I'm so sorry you're having to make such a big pot of soup." Oh, what a relief. Grandy knew that she didn't have to be careful about what she said around Midge. Midge wouldn't try to talk her out of how she was feeling. And Grandy could even laugh and not worry that Midge would assume that Grandy was over her grief. "Sorry I couldn't get here sooner." "No problem. I've had plenty of help. But most of these friends will be history pretty soon. They'll be over my tragedy long before I am. But I know you'll still be around." Grandy kept attending worship, even though she was mad at God. Sometimes she yelled at God and asked why this happened, and sometimes she demanded to know where God was when she was feeling so alone. Still, Grandy trusted God, but she didn't understand God. She sensed that people believed that if she really had faith, she would be spared deep sorrow, anger, and loneliness. Grandy kept reminding herself to be grateful for all the emotions that God had given her. One day, as Grandy and Chester were going for a drive, Chester asked, "Mom says that you've been making tear soup. What does she mean?" "Well, tear soup is one way for you to sort through all the types of feelings and memories you have when you lose someone or something special, or when something sad happens. Remember when your baby brother died right before he was born, and your mom sat holding his blanket? She was making her tear soup. You made tear soup yourself by acting out your disappointment when you shouted at Jason, wishing that his brother had died too. Remember when Billy's dog died and he didn't want to play with you? Not feeling like having fun is one of the ingredients of tear soup. And remember when Aunt Meg got divorced and they had to move? There was a lot of tear soup simmering in that house. Some days when you're making tear soup, it's hard to even breathe. Some days you feel like running away. You just hope that a better day comes along, and then comes one of the hardest parts of making tier soup. It's when you decide that it may be okay to eat something instead of soup all the time. The next morning, as Grandy was cleaning up, Chester asked her if she was done making their soup. "Well, I don't think you actually ever finish. The hard work of making this batch of soup is almost done, though. I'll put the rest in the freezer, and we'll pull it out from time to time when we need a little taste." "So what else have you learned by making tier soup, Grandy?" "I've learned that grief, like a pot of soup, changes the longer it simmers and the more things you put in it. I've learned that sometimes people say unkind things, but they don't mean to hurt you. And most importantly, I've learned that there is something deep within all of us ready to help us survive the things that we think we can't survive. Grandy, you know so much. What will I do after you die? Don't worry, I'll leave you my recipe of tier soup."